Right now, I am taking a quick detour from talk about the calamity that is British politics at the moment and focusing on the idiocy that is occurring across the pond. Personally, I must say, it is a much welcome reprieve. For you see, good people, we in the land formerly known as Britannia, now mostly referred to as Islamistan, are not the only ones to elect the incompetent, the insane, or just genuinely the ignorant into power. No. Our American cousins could teach a masterclass in such lunacy, as it really doesn't matter over there if it comes from the right or the left. Both are equally insane. Lunacy that this election cycle takes the form of what can be unburdened by what has been.
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 I said, shut up, bitch. Shut the fuck up.
Let me make clear from the start. No, this is not a video of me telling you which candidate to vote for, because as far as I'm aware, there are really 3 candidates you could choose from. A cyborg, a tangerine, and this person.
Well, let's start with this.
I'm sorry, your time's run out.
No, the objective of this video is very clear. It is not me telling you who to vote for. Let's face it, I'm English, I don't have that right, nor should anyone, even other Americans, have that right. Voting is all about you, the person, decide what is the correct course of action. At least that's the theory. What I am going to do is list 5 good reasons why you shouldn't vote for one out of the 3 candidates, because I do believe she is so mind-numbingly awful that every time she speaks, birds fly in the opposite direction for safety. All 5 points are based on factual evidence, not theory, not conjecture, and not biased reporting. Most of the evidence either comes out of her own mouth or comes from video footage of her doing things. Additionally, the video evidence is not 10 or 20 years old. I recognise views can change over time. Therefore, the footage is all within the last 4 to 5 years, mostly within the last 2 years in fact. Now, you may think, as this video goes along, there are other reasons why she's such an awful candidate, reasons I don't mention. Well, feel free to list them below. I'm sure there will be so many that my comment section won't be able to take the amount of undocumented people. Comments. I meant comments. I should really cut that. Let's start with an obvious one, shall we? Immigration. The biggest argument from her recently started campaign is that her and her team are stating that the crisis at the southern border is not her fault directly and that the label of border czar is a Republican talking point. And while yes, it is true Republicans have used this term to describe her over the years, it is also true many others have used this term to describe her, many others who are, from what I can see, media allies.
No.
But of course, there is a reason she is referred to as the border czar, isn't there? That's because, well, Biden put her in charge of the thing back in March 2021. It's literally documented on the White House archives.
Really?
Really?
But that's not really the issue, is it? No. The issue is the fact she is distancing herself from it because she completely and unequivocally failed.
We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border. Gotcha, bitch!
And I haven't been to Europe. And I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making.
I mean, she didn't even visit the area, but are we surprised? Really? Remember, this is the woman who advocated for illegals not to be classed as criminals.
An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal, and we have to correct course in this conversation.
This is the woman who is also in favour of everyone, regardless of being a legal citizen or not, having access to the same level of healthcare as someone who has been paying for it all their lives.
Every individual who is a resident of the United States is entitled to benefits for healthcare services under this act. Not every individual who's a citizen, but every individual who's a resident. So you support giving universal healthcare, Medicare for all, to people who are in this country illegally?
Let me just be very clear about this.
Oh, shit. Here we go again.
I am opposed to any policy that would deny in our country any human being from access to public safety, public education, or public health, period.
Politics is the worst.
The Second Amendment. I realize that gun issues in the United States are a hot button issue, so if you are someone who doesn't like guns whatsoever or wants high restrictions in place, you should just disregard this next section because this is more tailored for those who are unaware on what our views are retaining to this subject and haven't made an informed decision. However, we can quickly establish those views by going back to our very first presidential rally.
We who believe that every person in our nation who should have the freedom to live safe from the terror of gun violence will finally pass red flag laws, universal background checks, and an assault weapons ban.
Never, ever, 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 ever.
Red flag laws, universal background checks, assault weapons ban. These are the three things that Kamala Harris proposes to do when she becomes President of the United States. Okay, well, what does this mean? Of course, there's the obvious assault on the Second Amendment, but it goes deeper than that. Red flag laws, in order to successfully work, would have to violate aspects of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments as well. The fourth being, for those who don't know,
the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
And the relevant part of the Fifth Amendment being,
no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation.
So in order for this to work, these amendments would have to be overwritten, so to speak. They would require an additional amendment attached or something similar, making you completely vulnerable to other injustices occurring. Injustices mainly occurring at the hands of federal government. She also talked about universal background checks. Well, in order for this to function, it would mean more federal oversight, less power to the state in the creation of a national gun registry. And by having this national gun registry, this therefore means a risk exists of federal confiscation of your weapons at any given time. All you need is the wrong person in office, whether that's her or someone else. It doesn't matter. The risk is there. So you would need to violate 3 amendments of the Constitution for all of this to apply. Therefore, you would have no protections. You would be left vulnerable. You would have no rights in this regard. Rights that your country have fought long and hard for. She also wants an assault weapons ban, which has been demonstrated with the first 2 points that this would be automatic and included with the overturning of citizens' rights. The issue when it comes to the Second Amendment is that it's incredibly emotionally charged and also awfully subjective. What constitutes a rifle to one person is not to another. What constitutes as safety is also different from one to another. However, it is my feeling that you have to operate from a pure logistical and historical point of view, and therefore removing or even altering this part of American culture can typically be characterized as being very un-American. Of course, some people may think this is all smoke and mirrors, and it's just a typical election time slogan. That would be a fair point, if she hadn't already in this administration been made supervisor of the newly formed White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, a stepping stone for doing everything she has said in this clip when she ascends into the top job, which in her mind is a foregone conclusion. Remember, Harris has been saying things like this long before she was VP.
I will snatch their patent so that we will take over. And yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. It's the question is, do you have the will to do it? I have the will to do it.
You know, when you get it wrong, you really get it wrong.
Economics. Now, I hope as these points start to go on, you will notice one overarching point that is quite evident as to why voting for Kamala Harris may be an error. A point that will be summarized as reason number 5 later on, but let's just see if we're on the same page when it gets to number 5. So for now, let me show you a Kamala Harris who truly believes that even if you don't aspire, even if you don't work hard, even if you don't do your bit, regardless if you live legally in the USA or not, all the people living in the United States deserve the same results.
It has to be about a goal of saying everybody should end up in the same place. And since we didn't start in the same place, some folks might need more. Equitable distribution. Giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place. And if you then understand not everybody started out in the same place, you understand some people need more.
Equity, equity, equity. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Some folks might need more. But which folks? How do we define who gets more and who gets less? Is it done by merit? Well, it can't be by merit, because there would be no need for equity if everyone did their best. They would be awarded for their best efforts, so you must be going by people's characteristics. Considering you are actually incredibly vague about undeserved communities needing more equity. Hell, you even said in the wake of a hurricane in Florida back in 2022 that the lowest income communities and communities of color are the most affected when a hurricane hits. I didn't realize that hurricanes were that racist. Who knew? Who knew, right?
It is our lowest income communities and our communities of color that are most impacted by these extreme conditions and impacted by issues that are not of their own making. And so we have to address this in a way that is about giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place.
But friends, this is just the tip of the iceberg. On inflation, she's had some interesting thoughts too. When I say thoughts, thought. Maybe half a thought.
What are you going to do to fix this problem with inflation?
All right, thank you. Well, let's start with this. Prices have gone up.
Right, yeah, of course.
And families and individuals are dealing with the realities of that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up.
Can't you see how retarded she is?
That's about having to stress and stretch limited resources.
Free trade can be wonderful if you have smart people, but we have people that are stupid.
That's about a source of stress for families that is not only economic, but is on a daily level, something that is a heavy weight to carry. So it is something that we take very seriously.
Are you sure?
Very seriously.
Okay.
Not to mention an incredibly well thought out housing plan.
We also know that as the price of housing has gone up, the size of down payments have gone up as well. Even if aspiring homeowners save for years, it often still is not enough. So in addition, while we work on the housing shortage, my administration will provide first-time home buyers with $25,000 to help with the down payment on a new home.
A housing plan that was debunked in 4 minutes and 25 seconds by someone with a quarter of a century of experience in the real estate market. I'll give you the highlights now, but the full video is in the description below.
The Kamala Harris-Tim Walz campaign is unveiling a housing plan today. As a housing expert, someone who's been in the business for 24 years, owns my own firm, and has been heavily involved in policy issues at all levels of government, I felt obligated to bring y'all some viewpoint on what's going to be rolled out. is a wonderful plan to call for the construction of 3 million new housing units. Now, that does sound good, and I agree that it's good to have conversation about the fact that our supply is the problem, not so much demand. However, couched in that wonderful little headline is a real problem, friends, because their goal is to have the federal government take over zoning. Zoning should only be under local control. Cabarrus County, North Carolina, where I am, is wildly different than Mecklenburg County right next door. And frankly, we don't have the foggiest idea what's best for Syracuse, New York, or Kansas City, Missouri, or even Kansas City, Kansas. I don't like giving the federal government any control when this country was built to make sure that every zip code could have its own personality and its own leadership.
Harris's economic understanding is the same as a first-year politics student who suddenly discovers Karl Marx for that very first time and thinks all his ideas are an excellent blueprint without any critical thinking to evaluate them adequately. She likes the shiny ideas it presents, such as everything being free, but doesn't understand the practical application of it all. This is a woman that if you asked her about the concept of 2 and 2 making 5, she would simply say, actually, it makes 4, believing that she was truly the smarter person in that conversation, unaware of the context the phrase portrays. Consistency. This is going to be a relatively shorter section, as the notion of being all things for all people was actually highlighted, believe it or not, by CNN.
How Kamala Harris's campaign unraveled, they obtained the resignation letter of the Harris campaign state operations director, who is now joining the Bloomberg campaign. She wrote, "It is unacceptable that with less than 90 days until Iowa, we still do not have a real plan to win. Our campaign for the people is made up of diverse talent, which is being squandered by indecision and a lack of leaders who lead."
That's because Kamala Harris doesn't have a drop of charisma and would most likely believe that charisma was some form of deadly pathogen.
We've tried out a number of different messages over the past several months and just tried to see what has stuck, and it's been difficult to follow her campaign because there have been so many different messages. And one of the biggest debates that she's having internally is whether she wants to be sort of this progressive, left-wing California liberal, or whether or not she wants to be more of a moderate. And both of those lanes are currently clogged up, and the fact that she's kind of vacillating between the two of those makes it difficult for any voter to stick to her when there are so many other options.
That's also because she really does want to rule as a hard left-wing candidate, but is most likely being advised, as many UK politicians are advised, that you can only win from the centre. Which, to be fair, is actually nonsense. There is clear evidence from other nations that it is not necessarily true. But in terms of the United States of America, which is a naturally socially conservative and or moderate nation overall, won't accept a hard left candidate when push comes to shove. There's too much history there. Biden advertised himself as a left of centre sort of centrist candidate, and he prevailed. But he also had an established base of support. He had been in politics for a very long time, some would say too long. She has no such thing outside of California. And even then, it's divisive.
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Not to mention, just to say, she's hardly consistent if Orange Man to her is so awful that she goes then and steals his own policy.
The Babylon Bee had a hilarious little caption. They said, when I get in office, I'm going to change things, says the woman who's in office right now. Because she's in office. Yeah. She's talking about fixing all these things. Like, hey,
from
you're
day one,
literally the vice president.
On day one, I'm going to really do something about the border.
But
says
you
the
are
borders are
essentially the president right now.
Yeah.
This is so fucking crazy. You'll be the president for 5 more months.
Yeah.
This is so nuts.
But yeah, she's flipped on everything except for plastic straws.
Plastic straws are a big thing right now.
Yeah.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. Yes.
She still wants to get rid of those.
Did you see the thing where Trump came out and said that he was going to stop taxes for tips?
Yeah.
And I'm going to work it out that there's no tax on Social Security for seniors. I'm also doing no tax on tips. No tax on tips.
Of hospitality workers, and you wouldn't tax them on tips anymore.
Yeah, that was like a month and a half ago.
Yeah, and then she came out and said she's going to do it.
And eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
Right. And she's going to stop tips. And everybody cheered as if it was her idea. But here's the problem. In 2022, she was one of the deciding votes to go after people that were not reporting their tips.
Was that on the Inflation Reduction Act?
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.
Or the Green New Deal?
I am offering a Green New Deal that has been described as one of the most aggressive and progressive.
Well, I think it was one and the same. Right. She was the tiebreaker.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're going to tax the business instead, which in turn taxes the workers that are there.
But it's hilarious that 2 years later she's acting like this is her idea now.
Yeah.
Like, you had a chance. You could have swung it the other way 2 years ago.
Now here comes number 5. I said to you earlier there was one overarching point that I wanted to make that leads to this one here. Can you all guess what it is? No? Okay. It's this. Kamala Harris is stupid. Now, please understand, this isn't some silly insult. No, I'm literally saying she's stupid. She is actually textbook stupid. She doesn't understand the basics for anything that is required from a leadership position, especially the President of the United States. Yes, I am aware that you surround yourself with advisors who are more qualified on the main issues than you are, but you still need to be able to articulate what those advisors have told you in a debate, for example, or just to the press. I've already demonstrated she doesn't understand inflation.
Are you going to do to fix this problem with inflation?
She doesn't understand the economy as a whole. She doesn't understand how to publicly speak.
Ultimately, this election is about a question that we each face. We each face a question in this election.
We must move forward, not backward, upward, not forward, and always twirling, twirling, twirling towards freedom.
Not to mention anything of nuance to do with Ukraine.
So, Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong.
Or actually, how many people reside in the United States?
220 million Americans who just in the last several months died.
Wrong! Wrong!
We are in the midst of a public health epidemic that has taken the lives of over 220 million Americans in just the last several months.
Day.
Hell, she doesn't know how time works.
The governor and I, and we were all doing a tour of the library here, and talking about the significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs. And there is such great significance to the passage of time when we think about a day in the life of our children.
Shut up, silly woman.
I don't know about you, but if either one of the two other candidates loses to her, and I say either one of the two, we're mostly focused on one of them, if he loses to her, America is even more insane than Britain right now. But that will be entirely up to you, won't it? Your vote, your choice. But there is a part of me, and this is just my opinion, a part of me truly believes she is some sort of psyop. She has to be. She can't be this dumb. How can you reach this level of power without people along the way pointing and realizing, damn, you really are stupid? Especially when your main opponent is making some smart choices right now in preparing to debate you. Bringing Tulsi on is such a great move. But in terms of Harris, her campaign, having that other moron as her running mate, it's all made me think of something I remember learning about years ago. Let me read a description, and you tell me if this sounds like what the current administration is like and what her administration would be like. A strategy to reduce poverty by encouraging people who were eligible for welfare benefits but not receiving them to enroll for such benefits, thereby leading to bureaucratic and fiscal crisis at the local and state levels, and eventually to federal intervention in the form of a provision of a minimum guaranteed annual income. Does this not sound a lot like Harris on price fixing? On housing issues? On, well, I was going to say inflation, but she doesn't even know what that is. This sounds a lot like her, doesn't it? Well, this is actually a description of something called the Cloward-Piven strategy, and it dates back all the way to 1966. Frances Piven, one of the two who came up with this theory of how to end poverty as she saw it, has been described in the past as one of the 9 most dangerous persons in the world and an enemy of the Constitution. Now, I am not stating this is the strategy that Harris's campaign is actually using. Like I said, this section is just my opinion, but the similarities are rather striking, don't you think? So, ladies and gents, I think that about wraps up the 5 reasons not to vote for Kamala Harris. Like I said before, any other reasons not covered, do feel free to comment below. For those who think all these ideas of hers are wonderful...
Eat a pack of dicks, lady.
Yeah, you go do that. But anyway, thank you all for watching, do take care, and as always, God bless.